So, I was a fan of the Nostalgia Critic and the Channel Awesome ecosystem back in the day, with one of my favorite creators in that ecosystem being Linkara of Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. I respect Linkara a lot still, and he helped expose me to cool characters like Rob Space Knight and Cassandra Cain, but as I grew older and read comics myself, I don't agree with him as much as I thought I did. And the character we're talking about today might be one of the biggest punching bags of Linkara's comic reviewing career, Superboy Prime. So Crisis on Infinite Earths is this bloated, maximalist tale with characters and lore stuffed in nearly every page. It's a monumental story, but it's an overwhelming one, especially removed years from the context of why it happened. However, in DC Comics Presents number 87, in the midst of this sensational comic book event, we were introduced to the Superboy of Earth Prime, named Clark Kent. Earth Prime is a stand-in for the real world where all fictional characters we know are just comics and cartoons. Which means Clark has the same name as a fictional character in his reality, though he still has the same origin as Superman. Superboy's Kryptonian powers finally awakened when Halley's Comet passed by Earth, but he was soon thrusted into the Crisis on Infinite Earths alongside other heroes. At the end of that story, he, Alexander Luthor, and the Golden Age Superman and Lois Lane all headed to a paradise dimension where they observe all the happenings in the DC universe over the course of the next couple decades. Then it was time for a new crisis to take place in the mid-2000s, where Superboy Prime and his friends would return as an antagonistic force, as Superboy Prime kept seeing how grim the universe became with so many morally questioned choices that he vowed to make things right. However, Prime becomes so blinded by raw emotions and hatred that he goes overboard in lashing out, killing various heroes, including the at-the-time title holder of Superboy, Connor Kent. Prime is ultimately defeated by the modern Superman at the end of the story, but he would come back as a recurring nuisance in various stories like Final Crisis. By the end of the Final Crisis tie-in issue Legion of Three Worlds, Superboy Prime is sent back to the Prime universe where everyone, including his own family, knows what evil stuff he's gotten up to since Infinite Crisis, where the character was given a bit more of a proper send-off for a while before the New 52 came around and did a universe reboot. Now, I know at the beginning of this video I was saying how much I disagree with Linkara on things, and this implies that I was going to defend the evil Superboy Prime era, but I gotta be honest with myself and say that I think Superboy Prime's villainous turn kinda sucked. Granted, he wasn't much of a character before, as in Crisis on Infinite Earths, he was more of a neat concept, but nothing more. But there was merit to that concept, as he was a funny idea to represent the target comics demographic of nerdy teenagers who wish they could have superpowers to see themselves in the fight for all multi-reality. Then in the 2000s, a time of comics filled with shock value, a new batch of writers and editorial came in and basically made him into a whiny fanboy who complains that everything was better back in his day. They turned a loving tribute to their audience into a straw man of their haters, which, yeah, people are gonna hate, especially when he starts to kill off characters with ongoing adventures. It's interesting from a storytelling and thematic standpoint, having this simple Silver Age style character grow more complex by complaining about a problem with modern comics and later becoming said problem with modern comics, but Prime never really stuck with audiences as a compelling villain during his villainous peak of the late 2000s. In fact, he became a punching bag for many fans of everything wrong with DC Comics at the time. But I will say, going back and reading these stories in retrospect and knowing what people thought, makes the Final Crisis ending more effective to me, where he starts to live in his parents' basement and complain about comic books online. It's a silly ending, but a fun way to round off the meta-commentary on fan culture that Superboy Prime was both conceptualized and morphed into being. Still, he unfortunately wasn't the most endearing character during those years, and it's unfortunate that Infinite Crisis made him a villain for so long, because a year before that event started and brought Prime back to the main universe, Kurt Busiek was a fan of that one issue of DC Comics Presents that introduced him back in the day, and after having a successful critical career with stuff like Thunderbolts, The Marvels, and Astro City, he wrote a non-canonical miniseries that modernized and gave more meaningful pathos to this alternate version of Superboy Prime called Superman's Secret Identity. Instead of being an action-packed brawl where there's superpowered villains to fight, Secret Identity serves as a more meditative tale on the legacy of Superman and his core ideals. It's a coming-of-age story where each issue tackles a different time of Clark's life, starting from his teenage years to becoming an old man. It's a great comic and shows the duality of what different people could take from the same origin story. Where Jeff Johns saw the potential for a shocking, grim portrayal with meta-commentary on toxic fans, Kirk saw the opportunity for an uplifting story about finding yourself. It's not the Superboy Prime ongoing he wished for or wanted to write all those years ago, but as Secret Identity shows, time marches on and things things change within the world and ourselves. At the end of a collected edition of Secret Identity, Kirk wrote a mini blurb explaining his inspirations for the story, where he even winked at DC to call dibs on a Superboy Prime ongoing series, if it happened. While Mr. Busiek did get to work on mainline action comics and Superman over the years, he hasn't touched anything of the reintroduced Superboy Prime. Though given recent events we're about to get into, I do hope Kirk Busiek gets to write another Superboy Prime story someday. Because Superboy Prime would return in the 2020s, and by the end of Dark Knight's Death Metal would get a redemption arc, shown in the one-shot tie-in event issue Secret Origin. This is a great jumping on point for the character if you want to catch up with his recent antics, as it recaps his past in a compelling way, as it examines why he did all that, and then proceeds to give the character a selfless heroic sacrifice that nobody in the DC universe would know about against the Batman who laughs. Though it's ultimately a happy ending as Prime returns to his own dimension, this time with all his superpowers intact, to presumably help the people of his Earth. This could have served as another ending for the character, like the Final Crisis story, but Joshua Williamson, the writer of mainline Superman comics since 2023, I assume saw the potential in more stories featuring the Redeemed Prime and started to set him back up in the mainline universe during the Legion of Darkseid arc. After yet another event comic, DCKO, Superman would vanish for a while, leaving Superboy Prime to take over the mainline Superman book, where he's currently 4 issues into a very fun story arc. Superboy Prime has been reinvented once again, though this time, instead of being an unpleasant, violent edgelord, Prime has now changed his ways into becoming a charming, fourth-wall-breaking hero who can be a bit mischievous at times, but ultimately has his heart in the right place, wanting to do the best he can, and has this infectious sincerity to his presence that screams, "I am happy to be alive and a superhero." He's such a joy to see on the page, but honestly, he also touches my emotional core, because I see a lot of myself in him. Back in the day when I was a Channel Awesome fan and watched Linkara tear apart Superboy Prime's Infinite Crisis characterization, I was a kid with a lot of anger issues and was ultimately very lonely. I didn't help myself with that in many regards over the years, but that's all in the past now, so all I can do now is pick up the pieces and move forward to be the best I can be, much like how Prime is doing right now. I also think it's neat that one of the major villains of this arc seems to be Manchester Black, who I know from one of my favorite DC storylines, Superman vs. the Elite. He's a perfect fit for the first major threat to go up against, as he's often tied to deconstructions of Superman, like versus the Elite, and Prime's entire existence has sort of been that. And that's all of Superboy Prime's comic appearances. So what's a moral we can learn from Superboy Prime's story so far? Well, for me, it's that things are always changing, and sometimes change can be for good, as people like Prime who have screwed up many times in the past can come back and surprise you with how much they've grown. Comic book universes like DC and Marvel are never stagnant for better or worse. They're always changing, getting more layers, characters are switching sides and going through new tragedies and journeys all the time. Not all of that stuff is good, but it is what it is, and we can learn to move past it and be better. So, will you fly with him? Side note before I end the video, I found it very fitting that the fanboy character who is a self-described power scaler's dream got his first major adaptation beyond comics from fans, as Death Battle did a battle featuring Prime against the Sentry from Marvel Comics, where he defeats the Sentry and gives him an unorthodox death but a wonderful happy end. Like, I find it so awesome that even fan content could show how much a character has changed over the years. It's great! Alright, time to wrap things up. Special thanks to my patrons, Gillustrations, Cola Robobi, Alex Dreaded Cypher, Zai of America, Mr. Falcon Punch, Riddler Randy, Titanium Rocket, Pack Jeff, and Jack Rocket.